I just want to start off by saying I can't take Black Lives Matter seriously. Perhaps it started out with good intentions to fight police brutality, which is a major problem in this country, but it's just fallen by the wayside. It seems to have drifted so much from its original mission. Like when the riots broke out in May 2020, and there was a lot of looting and property damage going on. Everybody was saying property could be replaced, property could be replaced. Even the CEO of Target was tweeting that stuff out. But at the same time, a business can only lose so much stuff before they start closing stores. Like, for example, in a specific area in a city, if they're losing too much money from a particular store, not turning over profits, they're going to close it, which often is a huge problem, not just an inconvenience, but a huge problem for people who live in those poorer areas because then they don't have anything where they can get their major groceries in the local vicinity. And well, if you can't eat, you get the idea. I've read many articles about places like Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, and other major store chains closing stores across the country for this reason. And especially in San Francisco, I remember reading an article that half of the stores in the major downtown area are closing. So this whole property can be replaced thing kind of precipitated a lot of, well, business closures. It might even lead some once great cities to die, and that's the unfortunate thing. Another thing I saw was people in BLM were frequently saying that all the police were instigating this stuff, or it was white supremacists coming in from the outside and doing it to make the protesters look bad. But think about this for a second. If it was only corrupt police officers and white supremacists doing that, and not the BLM protesters themselves, why the hell would the protesters say property can be replaced? Because I know they're not doing it, but it looks like they're then supporting the actions of Ku Klux Klan members and corrupt police officers if they are the only ones doing it. So I think, at least implicitly speaking, they would want a good sized portion of it to be BLM activists slash protesters doing the rioting and looting. Let me think. And just imagine having a family business of your own, having it built up from built from the ground up through blood, sweat, and tears, nothing but hard work, probably a decade's worth of work, and then having it either burned down or constantly looted all the time to where you could to where you had to close the store. BLM alienated a lot of people that otherwise would have supported them by endorsing such actions and some of their members carrying out that kind of stuff. I mean, how would you feel if your whole life was taken apart like that? I saw a video recently where a 7-Eleven worker was beating the hell out of a guy who was literally just taking a trash can and shoving shit off the shelves. I'm pretty sure it was drugs, if I remember correctly, into it. And people are tired of it. People are fed up with it. I mean, the crime rate has skyrocketed to as much as 400% in major cities, specifically violent crime like assaults and murder, and many places theft. And of course, the pandemic plays a partial responsibility to this, but it really shot up after June 2020 when the riots started. Now, of course, correlation doesn't imply causation, but if the pandemic was probably the largest variable, you probably would have seen the theft skyrocket earlier, like in March and April rather than June, but you just don't see that. And plus, you take with all the anti-cop sentiment going around, the whole "all cops are bastards" thing. You have a lot of police officers who feel like they can't do their job anymore because they feel alienated by the general public. They quit, or there's a mass exodus of officers from major cities. They relocate to rural areas, smaller towns that are generally more traditional, so they can feel appreciated and supported by the general public there. And as a result of fewer police officers inside major cities, the crime rate also skyrockets for that reason. If you have any doubts as to whether police presence has an effect on crime, there was these riots in Montreal. I think it was Montreal in 1969, where the cops went on strike for 24 hours due to unfair pay, all that kind of stuff. And crime just broke out across the city. Just Google Montreal riots 1969. There's a good Wikipedia article on it. I don't remember all the details, but that's just one example. I also remember the Seattle Autonomous Zone. It had a huge, huge crime rate. And as usual, people would blame so-called outsiders coming in and as if they weren't part of the group to begin with. But that's just the thing. If you have an area that is not watched over by police officers, whether or not it's caused by the people who were initially there trying to set up some kind of utopia, is irrelevant. You're still going to have the crime to deal with. And that takes me into the all cops are bastards thing. I mean, it's the same fallacy that racists use, faulty induction. You take a few bad apples and you automatically generalize it to the whole group. And they use that faulty logic to just claim all cops are bad. But this is obviously not true. I mean, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want me applying that logic to black people. And given that per capita speaking, at least, they have the highest crime rate of any minority or group in the United States, yeah, you definitely wouldn't want me to apply that logic. I've heard things like, oh, you are, well, never mind. I'll just close that section with saying if you say all cops are bastards, you're committing the same fallacy as racists, and the irony is kind of lost on you. I also remember reading some research. There's something in sociology called the 3.5% rule. And I came across a small article. I think it was titled How a Small Minority Can Change the World. There was a recent study done, and it turns out that nonviolent protests are twice as effective as violent protests in uh, stopping totalitarian governments or police brutality, this whole type of thing that BLM's original mission was based on. And all it takes is about 3.5% of the population, kind of as the critical threshold, to enact major change. Many people would, intuitively speaking, surmise it's probably closer to 20 to 25%. And no, surprisingly, it's closer to 3.5%. They shouldn't be too far off. I mean, just think of the far left and how they probably make up 3.5% of the population. Most liberals are not that radical. Yet they seem to control all the media stations, the cancel culture, the PC culture, all the bullshit that's going on in the world today. So if you look at the research, and liberals often say trust the science, so apparently not this science, you will see that peaceful protests are twice as effective. Feel free to Google that for more information. And another thing I find ironic about this protest is just a couple months earlier, everyone on the left was saying, stay home, but let's beat this virus. Let's beat Corona together. Let's not spread it. Yet all that went out the window in May 2020. They were congregating in huge crowds to protest the death of George Floyd. Not, well, some of them were wearing masks, but they obviously weren't social distancing. And it's just like the whole freaking coronavirus thing seemed to go out the window. So that I found kind of ironic. Let me think here. What else do I want to say? Um, Another thing I don't, if correct me if I'm wrong, but did BLM accept tens of millions in donations? And I remember seeing another article not too long ago that they declared bankruptcy. How do you even do that when you have that much money on the backlogs? I mean, of course, there was the scandal of the one of the two, one of the two BLM co-founders buying large mansions. Notice the abbreviation pun from the donation money, and I just think a lot of people think that on the radical left, they want to believe that BLM isn't susceptible to corruption as much as any other organization. And it's just, I don't understand how people can take the organization seriously and not regard it as a domestic terrorist group when, after everything that happened in those few days around May and June 2020, and all the crime that skyrocketed as a result, etc. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a far rightist. The Proud Boys are also a domestic terrorist organization, and January 6th was bullshit. But everybody always wants to try and pretend that January 6th was the only big deal, and it's not even remotely equivalent to what happened in the riots in June of 2020. I mean, that's not true. I mean, you might put forth that the reason for the riots was to protest police brutality. And yeah, that is a valid point. But what resulted from it and what we see nowadays that's continuing to be the result from it, I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not too far off to say that the two are roughly equivalent or not as far apart as most people on the left would like to think. And like I said, police brutality is a major issue. It's something that needs to be solved. All bad cops should be held accountable. But at the same time, not everything is this comes from the systemic racism or this police brutality. another major reason is that black people are in the current predicament that they're in is they kill each other with such humongous rates on black crime. I mean, if you look at black on black crime versus white on white crime, the amount of homicides committed annually from white to white or black to black is about the same. But when you adjust for population size, obviously you have a quite a discrepancy there. I mean, a lot of this stuff, I hate to be so candid, but a lot of it is cultural, and black people do it to themselves. Black people do it to themselves. Racism is a major issue and it needs to be targeted, but a lot of it is also cultural and comes within their own communities, and they need to address that as well. They need to stop killing each other. I mean, somebody had to say it. So, in summary, I really can't take BLM seriously for the reasons I listed.